Communication can be one of the biggest challenges for startup founders, and today I had the opportunity to interview a giant in the communication space, Rory McGloin.
Sometimes maybe we want to be humble. Sometimes we feel like we're not ready, or where really what's worse is that you think nobody's going to care. If nobody was going to care, you wouldn't be doing the thing to begin with. So there are going to be people who are going to be enamored with what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to do. And I think one of the mistakes that people make is like, they're not honing their skills 24/7, like we were talking about, right? They're just like, okay, I have a pitch. But why not emphasize those communication skills? They're gonna make sure when I sit down with my customer, I can ask great questions, that I'm a great listener. Ultimately remind themselves, what I do is good, right? I have a particular set of skills that nobody else in this world has. You're in a privileged place to be able to bring your idea to a marketplace, and you're telling me it's gonna change the world? If you don't present it in a way that's compelling, then the world doesn't get your idea.
Rory, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sean, appreciate it.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about you're into communication and education and entrepreneurship. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, real quickly, we've been at the University of Connecticut now 19 years studying communication. I'm highly passionate about trying to help others to communicate effectively. And it has so many great applications. I have a joint appointment with School of Business. I also work at the College of Engineering. And of course, Associate Director at CCI, Entrepreneurship and Innovation, where we got a chance to meet and hang out at GCEC this weekend. So communication is not just what I do for work. I really like to think of it as just what I do.
Talk about startup founders. They often, have this problem of they're trying to get their message out to the world. They're trying to build product. Where do you see them really struggle the most, and what are some suggestions you have?
I think one of the things that early stage founders tend to overlook is the value of communication, right? And it's great to be fixated on your product or service and get to a place where you have an MVP and it's working and people are excited about it. But at the end of the day, like, you need to own this thing 24/7 everywhere you go. And I just think that sometimes I'll see entrepreneurs early stage, they're overlooking how important it is to start galvanizing their audiences before you have an MVP, to start getting the people in your life excited about what you're doing, like finding that support in an organic way. And that starts with consistently communicating about what your core values are and the brand value proposition you're trying to bring to the marketplace. And so if you're only doing it in the spaces that are labeled entrepreneurship, you're going to miss out.
Yeah. Well, I think I found some founders feel like, I'm bragging if I'm putting content out on social media. What would you say to that?
Absolutely not. Right. And my line from this weekend's workshop was, it's not about you. Right. And I understand that sometimes maybe we want to be humble. Sometimes we feel like we're not ready, or where really what's worse is that you think nobody's going to care. If nobody was going to care, you wouldn't be doing the thing to begin with. Yeah. So not everybody in your network, not everybody in your platform is going to care, but there are going to be people who are going to be enamored with what you're trying to accomplish, with what you're trying to do. Somebody else in the world is having that same problem, that same trepidation about it. So like, by not sharing it, you're really withholding the value that you're trying to bring to the world in the first place. So it just doesn't make sense. You've got to press send on content that aligns with what your value is, what you're trying to do. And I think really when you're not doing that, you're doing a disservice to the entire marketplace.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think about Sean Cannell's got that tagline, just press record. It's like, just get the images, get the videos, get stuff out there. And I think for a founder, there's kind of two ways that they can do it. Thinking about, they can approach it like, hey, I'm building something, come along for the ride and vlog it. But then it's like, there's some like overarching aspect of their mission that can be their voice in the world for that. But what are some things you've seen that's been successful in either of those?
Yeah, I think number one, I think taking people along the ride for the journey is so important because it's a chance for us to get to meet the founder. I mean, we know, right, having done work with so many great startups, that people are not just investing in your idea, they're investing in you. So this is an opportunity for people to get to see you. And how do you overcome challenges, trials, and tribulations? Like, those things are going to come your way. And if you're not able to show to the world like your character in these different spaces, how can I really think about investing? So number one, like, tell the story, like all the little bits of it, even the ugly side of it, because it's going to give us a sense of your character. And then the other thing is this: for so many early stage startups, right, your MVP isn't there yet, right? Or you have a limited supply of whatever it is that you're offering. You still have the ability to try to garner an audience once you're able to serve the marketplace. Like, your customers don't have to necessarily be able to purchase today to still be your future customers, right? So go and pull them in, get them excited about it. I always kind of make the example, like Steve Jobs was kind of sitting on the iPhone, supposedly for almost 2 years, right? They kind of knew it was coming, but they didn't let people know exactly when they were going to announce it. And he built. What did that do? It drew people in so that when it became available, they were in line waiting for it. We can do that with our customers too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think building that audience can really play a role, not just in promoting the product, but even just like creating fertile ground for customer development, customer discovery. What kinds of things have you seen work in that space?
I think that if you're not taking advantage of talking to people, and so communication doesn't just have to be when it's on camera, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, like, it all counts. And I think one of the mistakes that people make is like, they're not honing their skills 24/7, like we were talking about, right? They're just like, okay, I have a pitch. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that sometimes we even see centers such great emphasis on the pitch, But why not emphasize those communication skills and make sure when I sit down with my customer, I can ask great questions, that I'm a great listener, that I have the ability to infer and to make really good decisions on the information you give me. That's a communication process too. So we can talk about customer discovery, but at the end of the day, right, like part of it comes down to, do you have a great set of questions? Are you a decent facilitator for conversation? That's part of eliciting that input. And I think I'd like to see centers and people that are involved in this really take communication and bring it to the forefront of some of the work that they're doing.
Yeah. Well, so much I've seen in entrepreneurial education, the emphasis is on the pitch. So, there maybe it'd be like public speaking class or public relations class, with a lot of emphasis on pitching well, which is very important. But, you pitch maybe, 2% of the time, 5% of the time. And what about the rest of that time? What are some of the ways that communication can happen?
Yeah, I just think that ultimately, like, if the program is going to focus on the pitch, then they also need to focus on, like, how do we make a great pitch? And I think that comes from experiential learning. Ultimately, like, if you want a great pitch, you got to relate to the audience. They've got to be engaged, and that comes from going out and just literally experiencing things. And so, I think it's really important that, as we're saying, like, go and have conversations with people who are experiencing the same pains as you, and write those things down. Like, those testimonials are the evidence that are going to hook your audience in the pitch. But if you're stuck in the lab, right? If you're stuck behind your laptop and you're not engaging with your customer in some particular way, you don't have the fodder in those moments to be nimble and to be able to relate to an audience. And I think that can really be a big letdown. So it's simple as just encouraging, what I like to talk about is intentional, informal engagement, right? It doesn't always have to be on topic, but it's going to allow you to practice the skill sets so when the stakes are raised and the lights are on, you're ready to perform.
Yeah. Well, and even in the short time I've known you, you're not shy, right? But for startup founders, this can be a really hard thing. What are some steps they can take to just start to get out of the comfort zone?
I'll tell you, like, one of the things that is a piece of advice that's overlooked is that on a team, everybody should have a job and their role. One of the things that I would advise, like, if you're an entrepreneur, you're starting off and, communication is not something that you feel great about, don't let that be something that's going to hold the business back. Go and bring people onto your team, right? You need to have people that can do certain things. So the first piece of advice I have is, like, sometimes you recognize, hey, this is something that I'm not good at. Do I have somebody in my network? Do I have somebody who believes in what we're doing that will go and help be a presentation source for us? So that's one of the first things I do. Like, don't overlook the fact that, like, entrepreneurship is supposed to be collaborative. You're not literally needing to do every single job. We've seen this, right? They're relying on the founder who had the idea, who has the genius to go and pitch, and that might not necessarily be good fit. And then the second thing is that, like, take every single opportunity that you have whenever you get it to talk about your thing. I think too often we miss opportunities. Hey, John, how are you? Good. No, I want to hear something that's an opportunity for you to share. It's a practice, that rehearsal bit with me on an airplane, sitting on the train, sitting waiting for class to start. Like, those are opportunities, and we miss them. Yeah. So when somebody asks you what's going on, give them an answer, right? Take that as an opportunity to practice.
Yeah. Can you think of a time where someone you were working with really felt like they were in their shell, they were really struggling, and then you walked along beside them and really helped them take some steps out?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of those situations, and they are, without a doubt, the most rewarding situations that you can be a part of. Ultimately, it has always come down to, like, working with that person and getting them to ultimately remind themselves, what I do is good, right? I have a particular set of skills that nobody else in this world has, and it's my responsibility to, like, bring that forward. And I really try to put it to the folks that I coach and work with. I put an onus on them to say, you are responsible to go and do this. This isn't something that you can take for granted and just go, I'm not good at it. Well, hold on. The burden of responsibility is also, that's part of this process. Like, you're in a privileged place to be able to bring your idea to a marketplace, and you're telling me it's going to change the world. If you don't present it in a way that's compelling, then the world doesn't get your idea. And now I'm at a loss for that. And so I come at it from a place that ultimately is they need to hone in on what their given abilities are. Yeah. I try to get them to be really, really comfortable with what they look like, what they sound like, what they move like, what they act like, and say, you're going to need to work within the confines of what you've been given, and then go forward and be great with that. It doesn't happen immediately, but when you get that kind of onions to start unlocking and you start to see people looking inside of themselves and feeling like they do have the ability, when they come back 6 months or 6 years later and say, hey, I did it, I nailed it, it's the most rewarding part of what I get a chance to do.
Yeah. One of the things that I really love to see is when a founder almost becomes a mouthpiece, not just for their company, their brand, but for the industry or even just the idea that they represent. Yeah. What are some times where you've seen or helped people to kind of really discover what that is and present that?
Yeah, I think there's so many great entrepreneurs right now that are focused not just on bringing products to the market to make money, but to actually make the world a better place. And if you are a founder or you are working in a startup business that is trying to literally make the world a better place, you do have to go outside of your business model to be an advocate for that. We've had so many people come through CCI where we've had the chance to do that, and we try to make sure that they're presenting that part and parcel with how their solution is going to make maybe your and I's life better, right? With a pair of shoes or a piece of clothes, or the way that we, responsibly kind of dispose of our belongings. But then when they're contributing to the bigger ecosystem, that allows a greater cohort of people to be pulled in and ultimately excited about it.
Yeah. What are some ways if a founder is sitting there thinking, I'm not really part of anything bigger than myself, I'm just creating this widget or this service or this app, like how what are some ways you should use to kind of help them to figure out where they really make the most impact in the world?
Yeah, I mean, that can be a difficult thing for a lot of people to deal with, right? Because they don't know where their piece fits in, and ultimately kind of have to get it out there. I think one of the things is to kind of like humanize the process. So maybe you're not relatable on the widget, right? And maybe you're not relatable even on the business model, but you're certainly relatable for the struggles that we have as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's gone through trying to build his own business and recognizing you don't have all the answers. Sitting down just with other business leaders who do completely different things and recognize you have relatively similar problems, it doesn't make you feel as alone at night, right? When you go to bed and you wonder, like, am I not innovating quick enough? Am I too afraid of risk to take a chance? So I would say to them, like, maybe get outside of your own space. Like maybe you're too focused on your widget in your industry, and just go and talk to anybody in your space. If they're running a business, they go to bed at night asking themselves the same probably set of questions that you do. And it just feels good to have some partnership and some kinship in that space.
Yeah. What about social media? I think on one hand, everybody thinks, you got to be huge on social media to be successful. On the other hand, it's like can be overwhelming. How do you advise a startup founder to incorporate or to not incorporate social media or different platforms into what they're doing?
Yeah, it is difficult. I think one of the most important things you need to do is pick a channel, first and foremost, that you feel like really aligns with your brand. I think one of the things that we've loved recently about Instagram, for example, it's so visual. And I always point out, right, when we were coming up in school, being a little bit older, like we had to read and write. And the way that we told stories was through our writing. Well, if you go back maybe 150, 200 years, the way our great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers told story was oral. And then it evolved as written. And now today, we see photography, right? And of course, TikTok with the short reels and video is so important. So the first thing I would say to a founder is like, I'd ask them, like, what's your best channel? And if they came back and said to me, like, I'm a tremendous writer, it's okay, let's write. And maybe you need to be in a space more like LinkedIn, right? Maybe you actually need to be relying on like an email blog. Maybe you're a funny writer, you can captivate people, right? And maybe your prose is really good. So I often love to tell founders, like, hey, think about what channel you're great at. And in early days, you should pick a channel that you're good at. As you evolve, you need to pick channels where your customers are, right? But I say that that's secondary because I just think like it's important for you to build up some confidence in going into a channel. Like one of the biggest things, like right now, if like you were going to start a company and you said to me, Roy, I need to have you on TikTok tomorrow morning. Like, I don't know if that's a space I'd want to go to. And instantly now, if I'm on TikTok, like it doesn't align with my values. And I don't necessarily think that that's a good way to start your brand or your business, is diving into a space that you don't want to be in. And unfortunately, we live in kind of that like copycat economy. So we see something that somebody else is doing right on LinkedIn, we're like, oh, I should do that too. If it works for John, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work well for Rory.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about storytelling for a minute. I know we both share a love of storytelling. I've had some great exposure with a storyteller expert, Matt Zahn, who does Stories with Traction. I know we both share a love of the books, the Storyworthy and Matthew Dix. Talk about where storytelling comes in and some of the ways that you construct intentional stories.
One of the ways that I like to use storytelling, in particular to help entrepreneurs, is with Randy Olson's method, the and but therefore, that he has in his book, Houston, We Have a Narrative. And if you haven't read the book on storytelling, really, really good. But the reason that I like it is this. I think so often, right, the founders, the entrepreneurs that come up with a genius idea, they go to present it and it's really elaborate and it's overcooked and they're explaining it, they're using jargon, and they lose us, right? It's so critical early days to make the hook. So, and but therefore, just presenting your ideas in this way where and is the current reality. But there's a problem, therefore here's the solution. And this is something that I now have weaved into almost every facet of my life. Even we sit literally at the dinner table with our family, and I try to help my storytellers around the dinner table kind of get their and but therefore going. And the reason that I love it is this. The but moment, right, in any of our entrepreneurial journeys, that's the hook. So what happened, right? So there was this problem, so what happened? And so when you know that there's a therefore coming, people are going to stick around because they know that there's a solution coming. And when an entrepreneur is instead presenting and, it's redundant, it's boring, and this is a way to help make it engaging. It's simple. There's only 3 parts, so it's super memorable. And I'll do like 8-hour sessions, and we'll be there all day. And it's the one piece that people just seemingly always take away. They put in their back pocket and use it.
Yeah. So go back to the beginning a little bit. So I know one of the things that you do a lot in education, but also you've become a consultant. You've found ways to really build this platform, make money with it. Like, where did that all start? When did you realize this is the thing I've got to do? And what was it that made you like put it in motion?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I think, one of the things that happens if you spend enough time, I think, being passionate about something, you eventually begin to see separations and deviations of who is really passionate about this thing and who kind of cares about it and who has no idea. I honestly think that I spent most of my 20s assuming that everybody was as passionate about communication as I was. And then I think after time and having so many great exposures, one of the parts about communication and doing it in a business setting is that, like, any given day, you might be talking to somebody with an insurtech startup and then somebody with an agricultural startup piece. And then you go back to your classrooms and persuasion and motivation. You're looking at how a young person is being influenced by marketing. And then you go back out into the world and you talk to a consultant. And so you start to put this together. And I started to actually talk about the thing that I like to bring to whether it's my clients or my students or my family is this trusted intuition, right? You've now gathered all this data. You grounded it in theory. You are up in the literature and you're conducting research. And you put that all together and it seems to be this trusted intuition. And so ultimately what ended up happening was I just felt like I was going into settings and I was offering people advice on how to improve their internal communication, or like, here's something simple that you can do with your team. I love coaching, particularly sports. And so I found this thing. And so all of a sudden, right, when you start getting the emails, the phone calls, somebody says, they tap you because they're like, would you do this? And of course the responsibility that I felt like I had to them was like, yeah, 100%, like, this is my job. This is what I bring to the table. And so it's really been an incredibly rewarding experience to live as an entrepreneur now and to live as a business owner that's trying to do this to make opportunities for other, but at the same time, like, to be entirely still grounded by the gratitude and just being kind of the currency of thanks, like getting somebody to share content, getting somebody to make a better decision about who's going to be on their board, getting somebody to make a decision about how they're going to campaign for something and having it relatively work out. Like, that's the best currency in the world to be a part of.
That's awesome. So what about growing? Any thoughts of getting big, or do you like staying small? And what
this is my thought on it. It was described to me as a rock star model. I think one of the things that I love to do when it comes to, like, the business side of things, I love working directly with a client. Like, I want to have a relationship with them. I want to be on a first name phone call basis. I want to develop rapport and trust so that trusted intuition can come into play when they need it most. So for me, like, I think scaling would be somewhat against my core values of what is important to me. Like, I care deeply about the quality of communication.
Yeah.
And so to be able to scale at this current stage, like, the amount of investment it would take to make sure that the people who are representing the brand, who are going to be part of that value, could really adhere to it, I think it would actually just take away from the time that I could spend with the folks that I'm trying to help. That doesn't mean it's not possible in the future. But for me, like, that rockstar model, like, is something that, I actually, early days, everybody kind of critiqued it and they were like, you're never going to be able to grow with this. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think necessarily if you do good work and people trust you, that referrals will come. And then you get to pick and choose. You get to be a little bit more, I think, an owner of your time. And that's so important. I think so many entrepreneurs pursue what they do so that they can have autonomy over what they do in their time. And for me, I think by choosing to grow in a way that aligns with my values, it means I'm picking and choosing more carefully, like, who is it I'm working with, and are they going to give me something back that's not currency necessarily, but are they going to invest in me? Are they going to share energy with me that's going to allow me to go to the next job and do a great job there too?
Yeah. So what's thriving like for you? Like, what is kind of your best life? What is that, or what does that look like if it's a visionary?
I think really going forward, one of the things that I've begun to learn over the last several years is that executives, as we might call them, leaders that are in top positions that are maybe running large-scale organizations, it can get really lonely at the top, right? And leaders get paid a lot of money to make tough decisions. I think for me, one of the things I've really enjoyed is, like, being able to be a confidant, being able to help work them through decision-making processes, using communication theory, like, at the center of that core. And we talked about uncertainty reduction this weekend at the workshop. For me, I think that's highly fulfilling, right? Because you're providing comfort, you're providing a source of trust and intuition that somebody that really, really values it. That's what's important to me. Like, that's ultimately fulfilling. And then taking those lessons and bringing them back into classrooms of the next generation and being able to say, I had this experience, and let me tip you onto something that you're never going to find in your textbook. And it's not going to be on the quiz, but just understanding, like, this little moment of time when you're with somebody, how you can listen and reframe their thoughts is more powerful sometimes than you can have in some of our traditional learning. So That's happiness to me because it means that I'm constantly thinking about these different audiences at these different stages of their life. So whether you're working with an entrepreneur or you're working with somebody who's been doing it for 50 or 60 years, you have to maintain your sharpness, and that's fun. That's it. That's good.
That's awesome. So what are you working on right now? Or what do you see as like the next thing that you're really gonna hopefully break the world?
We talked about thought leadership this weekend in the workshop here at GCEC, and I think one of the things that I would like to be able to help is make thought leadership more accessible to a wider range of audiences. I think a lot of people think like, hey, it's not for me, I don't have anything to say, and if 2025 is going to bring anything into my life, I hope to kind of continue to try to be an example, maybe a bit of a lighthouse to say like, no, it's actually really important that you craft a skill because it's a chance for you to practice your communication, and it's a chance for you to practice written, it's a chance for you to walk by something that's meaningful and take a photo of it and make a connection to what it is that your purpose is. And I'd like to be able to help people with that. The other thing that's come back around, I think we're interested in this like post-COVID cycle where all the shakeup from the organizations that took place for the better part of 2 years, how we communicated. One of the things that it did was it made us a lot more efficient. One of the other things that it did was it kind of rattled the cage of like what values were most important in an organization. And I'm noticing a lot of organizational leaders right now are kind of stopping and saying, wait, the core values that we set are driving our business model, like we're not adhering to them.
Right.
And so I've been doing a lot of work in that space with helping organizations to really sit back and refine their values. Why? Because you communicate what your values are. And so if you say your values are actually communicating why, right, it's going to come out at some point in the wash where like your customers, your partners, your vendors, your employees are going to go, hey, this thing doesn't line up. So I'd rather an organization say, this is what we value, this is how we're going to communicate, and get it right. And then maybe the employee recognizes, hey, it's not the right place for me, or the vendor says this is the right place for me. That's better off than being disappointed and meeting expectations.
Yeah. Well, and I remember you were talking about that a bit earlier this week around just, so you're saying it's your value, but you're obviously doing something different.
Yeah.
And so maybe whether you like it or not, that's not your value, and this other thing is your value, or the
and own it, right? And be upfront about it because there's a million other people in the world that share relatively something close to that value, and those are the people that you should be trying to attract into your sphere, not trying to sell a value to somebody that's actually not even your own.
Yeah. So you have a fantastic media platform. All different kinds of things are out there. If someone wanted to really look at some of the things you're doing as an example, or really kind of absorb some of the content you have out there, what are some of the best ways for?
I mean, for me, like LinkedIn seems like the safest place for me to share my stuff. I think so many of us, right, we struggle with like how much social content do we want out there, and I'm becoming a bit more of an engaged Instagram user. But for me, LinkedIn serves as my hub, right? It's where I keep all my stuff. It's where I put my thought leadership. It's where I share the various bits and pieces that also come out of the company. When we go in and we learn something from an organization, we try to pass that along, and we pass along our little bits of insight. And we have accrued a following, and people, talk to us when they see us out in public and we go and we do something. They'll say, hey, I saw that quote, or I saw that idea. Thanks for sharing that slide. And that's always a great feeling because you know that, okay, it's resonating. And then you're kind of hoping that people are going to contribute to the conversation. Like LinkedIn to me is a place where like I'd like to see more of that dialogue, right? People kind of contributing and not making it just like a Facebook-like atmosphere with likes, but actually going in and digging in the concepts. And I'd love to see debate in those comment sections because it means that people are actually thinking, right? That's such a great indicator.
Yeah. So if someone's out there that's really a perfect fit for, really working with you and really making that transformation, what's their world look like? What's their profile? And, what would be the thing that will make them know like, oh, I should definitely reach out to Rory?
This is why John knows what he's doing, right? That's $1 million question. And I think it's a question that anybody that is watching this, like that's exactly how you start your business, right? Like who's your perfect customer? Yeah. For me, it's pretty simple. And I say this, I live with the value of communication. So I need to be around people that respect it at the very least, and that are intently passionate about getting better at it. So when somebody walks into my space and they say, I'd really like your help. Like, do you think you could help me? I know then and there, we are going to have an amazing relationship. I've been to enough meetings or pitches where I've gone in and said, hey, I think you guys could really use this opportunity to get better. And maybe the leader will say something like, I don't need this. Like, I'm all set, right? It's just my team needs it. And usually that's the first indicator where I'm like, oh no, you actually very much need this probably more than anybody. In fact, you might be the reason why we need to bring this in. So for me, like my ideal person is somebody that shows up and says, willing to learn. I talk about feedback being a gift. I think if you really want to get better at communication, like your self-awareness is going to be put front and center. So are you aware of how people are seeing you and reading you? Do you have a really good sense of how audiences are adjusting to you? And this goes for customers, right? Like you have to be aware of like how your brand is being perceived in the marketplace. And so if you're ignorant to that, if you're blind to that, if you're unintentionally not looking at it, like that's just not going to work for me. So I need to be able to provide feedback in a trusted way that says, this is where we're at right now. These are the opportunities to get better. Are you committed to doing that? And if the answer is yes, then I become so invested in that thing, that business, that person, that suddenly now we're kind of walking on the journey together. So for me, high value communication, passionate about improvement, and then let's rock and roll.
Yeah, and so they reach out and say, let's do it. What's the quick version of here's what they can expect?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think for me, it starts with a value alignment, and just kind of I go through like my instruction process. Somebody asked me the other day, like, how do you make that assessment? If I ask somebody like what their purpose is, which we've talked a little bit about this week, like what is your purpose or what is the purpose of your business, you can usually get a pretty good read on how quickly attainable that answer is to the person and their ability to articulate it in a manner that brings them to life, that they have clear enthusiasm about, that they've invested in it, they've been thinking about this, they are hoping somebody asks them this question everywhere they go. That's a major indicator for me, right? If I'm asking like, what is your purpose? Not your goal. I think a lot of people have goals. What is your purpose? What are you trying to achieve, right? What do you want the legacy of you or this business to be? If they can articulate that, for me, I always say, okay, you pass that kind of first litmus test that it's there. If you give me an answer that becomes really, really goal dictated, directed, it's just not a good fit for me. I think it might be a good fit for a lot of other different types of coaches that want to be goal directed, but I'm interested in the process, and I think kind of focusing on the process, that's what's critical.
It's awesome. Great. Well, this has been awesome. There's one question I always like to ask people before I wrap up, and I didn't prep you on this, so you're good. So one of the things I love to do is I like to break down films that are about founders.
Okay.
And so
cool.
I call them founder films. If you can think of a founder film that you really enjoyed, or what would be your favorite founder film?
Oh wow, that's such a great question. We were actually talking about the founder of McDonald's story, but certainly kind of not. I mean, the Steve Jobs film, obviously everybody kind of, goes to that one. I just watched the Vince McMahon documentary, earlier. That was really controversial, obviously, but a very interesting take on business. He has this line in it where he's like, I only do whatever's good for the business. That jarred a lot of people, right? Because they're like, you should look after your family and take care of things. But it was also an interesting take that like people are going to find success in very different ways. I wouldn't put that on the list. I think, unfortunately, right, that didn't turn out the way that anybody would have wanted it to. I have to get back to you. I'm going to put that in the comments in the post. I don't know exactly what I would say would be that great.
When I think of this moment, I don't know if you've seen it. It was a series that was on Apple Plus. It was called We Crashed. It's the story of WeWork.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I don't know if you've had a chance to see that one.
I haven't. I've heard so many people recommended it.
Yeah, well, communication is such a part of it. He was a brilliant communicator, very influential and inspiring. But of course, there was a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding about what was happening.
Yeah, right. Same thing with Zuckerberg, right? When they did the network, and you got to see the backside of it. And I think that those profiles are really important for us to be able to consume, because it's not always sunshine and rainbows. There's dark sides of these businesses, and I think that needs to come out. And actually, if you think about some of the movies we've spoken about, whether it's the founder or the network, the McMahon documentary, we were talking about the McDonald's, the founder, each one of those has these kind of dark sides, and so getting to see those profiles is really important. So I don't think it's a founder story, and it's far from it, but I think something that has really resonated with me that I hope people will kind of find the joy in this is Ted Lasso was something that became really inspirational. And the reason I'm going to relate to it as a founder story is because I think if you want to be a great founder, you got to be a great leader. And I think what Ted Lasso did for those of us that watched it, that enjoyed it, was it showed that leadership can take many forms. So we just referenced a bunch of examples where leadership kind of looked very dictatorish. One of the things that in that film there we get to see is by giving people space, by respecting them for where they are, by taking advantage of their skills and attributes, as Coach Lasso does in the film. To me, I think if an entrepreneur were to watch that, they could actually learn, this is how you manage your team in a way that's effective here in 2024, 2025. And that's a piece that resonated with me in so many ways, because I think that really in life, we are responsible for coaching each other, for giving each other feedback, for being good players to one another. I come from an improv background, make a partner look good. So that would be my answer. It's certainly not a founder story. I'll have to come up with a better founder.
Well, I don't know. I think about Ted Lasso would be a great example of a founder story in the space of what I would call intrapreneur.
Sure.
Stepped into an existing, established organization and completely transformed that organization through his leadership and through just the way he kind of brought a different approach.
Yeah.
So, great example.
John, this was awesome. I really appreciate the chance to be. That was so cool.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for spending some time with me today. All right, keep going.